After 7 days in the field, I came home expecting my little girl to run into my arms. Instead, I found her unconscious on the hardwood floor while my husband watched television. For 1 second, I honestly thought my mind had played a trick on me. The house looked normal. The lamp beside the couch was on. A half-empty glass of iced tea sat on the coffee table. ESPN murmured from the television. Ryan was in his usual spot, one ankle resting over his knee, remote in hand. But Lily was lying near the front door. Her pink sneaker had come off, one small arm was bent beneath her. The stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere was a few feet away, face down beside the hallway rug. Lily. My duffel bag hit the floor. I dropped beside her so hard my knees cracked against the wood. Her face was pale, and her breathing was shallow enough to scare the life out of me. "Baby, open your eyes." She didn't move. I looked at Ryan. What happened? He didn't stand up. He didn't even lower the volume. "She should have listened," he said. I remember staring at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence. There had to be more. A fall, a seizure, some explanation that didn't make my stomach turn cold. "What did you do?" He finally looked over, annoyed, like I had interrupted something important. "Don't start, Emily." She threw a fit. I handled it. I scooped Lily into my arms and reached for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it. The dispatcher asked if she was breathing. I said yes, barely. She told me not to give Lily food or water and to keep her still. Ryan muttered, "This is ridiculous." I didn't answer him. I pressed my cheek against Lily's hair and listened for the sirens. "I'm Staff Sergeant Emily Carter. I was 44 years old, then assigned to a logistics unit at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I had spent the previous week sleeping in a field tent, living on bad coffee, and checking supply manifests under floodlights at 2 in the morning. All week I pictured coming home to Lily. She was 5, missing one front tooth, and obsessed with horses. I had bought her a little stuffed palomino at the PX and tucked it into my bag. That toy was still inside the bag by the door. The ambulance arrived at 5:49 p.m. 2 paramedics came in fast, carrying equipment. One knelt beside Lily, while the other, a broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples, asked me questions. Her name, Lily Carter. Age, 5. Any medical conditions? Number. He glanced toward the couch. Ryan had finally stood up. The paramedic stopped speaking. It wasn't a dramatic pause. It was smaller than that. His eyes narrowed. His mouth tightened. Then he leaned toward me. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "is that your husband?" I looked from him to Ryan. "Yes." The paramedic took a slow breath. "I don't think you know who you're married to." The ambulance doors slammed shut, and I climbed inside beside Lily, refusing to let go of her hand. Ryan didn't come. He simply stood in the driveway with his arms folded, watching the ambulance disappear down Tiny Town Road toward Tenova Healthcare. If any of the neighbors noticed, they never said a word. The ride felt endless. One paramedic monitored Lily, while the other, the man who had whispered to me, sat across from us. His name tag read, Mike Sanders. I wanted to ask what he meant. Instead, I kept staring at Lily's tiny fingers wrapped around mine. She looked so small on that stretcher. Her blonde hair was tangled, and there was a faint bruise near her left temple that I somehow hadn't noticed inside the house. My stomach twisted. How had I missed this? Mike caught me looking. "She's stable," he said gently. "Let's get her checked out first." I nodded. It was the only thing holding me together. While doctors examined Lily in the emergency room, I sat alone with a paper cup of stale coffee that had already gone cold. The waiting room television played the local evening news. No one was really watching it. A little boy was building a tower with plastic blocks near the reception desk. An elderly couple quietly shared a vending machine sandwich. Life kept moving. Mine had stopped. As I waited, memories kept coming back. Not bad memories. Good ones. The kind that make betrayal hurt even more. I met Ryan 12 years earlier at a 4th of July picnic in Clarksville. I had just returned from a deployment overseas. He worked for a regional home security company and volunteered with Habitat for Humanity on weekends. Everyone seemed to know him. "That's Ryan," my friend Melissa had said. "One of the nicest guys you'll ever meet." She wasn't alone. People loved him. The cashier at Kroger knew his name. The pastor at church praised him for organizing food drives. Neighbors borrowed his tools. Older ladies hugged him after Sunday service. He had that easy smile that made people trust him before he'd spoken more than 3 words. I trusted him too, especially because Army life wasn't easy. Training, deployments, missed birthdays, long nights. Ryan seemed steady, safe, exactly the kind of man I believed Lily deserved. When we married, he stepped naturally into the role of husband. Then later, father. At first he was wonderful with Lily. He built blanket forts in the living room, taught her to ride a tiny pink bicycle in the cul-de-sac, read Goodnight Moon until she memorized every page. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if those memories were real, or if I simply wanted them to be. The changes came so slowly I barely noticed them. Ryan didn't like me having dinner with women from my unit. They don't respect family, he'd say. He preferred knowing exactly where I was, even when I wasn't on duty. He'd ask innocent questions. What time did you leave? Who was there? Why didn't you answer your phone? At first it sounded like concern. Then it became routine. If I stopped for gas on the way home, he'd ask why it took so long. If I bought something from Target, he'd ask to see the receipt. If I laughed at a text message, he'd want to know who sent it. I kept telling myself marriage required communication, compromise, understanding. Besides, Army families all carried extra stress. Didn't they? When I mentioned it once to Melissa, she shrugged. Some men are just protective. That word stayed with me. Protective. It sounded so much better than controlling. A nurse touched my shoulder. Mrs. Carter. I stood so quickly my coffee spilled onto the floor. Your daughter is awake. I nearly cried with relief. As I followed the nurse down the hallway, I noticed Mike Sanders standing outside Lily's room. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking through the glass toward Ryan, who had finally arrived. His expression wasn't angry. It was something much worse, recognition. And whatever he remembered had drained every bit of color from his face. Lily smiled when I walked into her hospital room, but it wasn't the smile I knew. It was cautious, like she was trying to figure out whether it was safe. That thought hit me harder than anything the doctors had said. She reached for my hand. Mommy, I'm here, sweetheart. She squeezed my fingers with surprising strength, then glanced toward the hallway. Is Daddy here? I looked at the door. He's outside. Her little body stiffened. Can he stay outside? The room suddenly felt smaller. I pulled my chair closer to her bed. Of course he can. Only then did she finally relax against the pillow. The emergency physician explained that Lily had suffered a concussion. Thankfully, there was no bleeding in her brain, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. What happened? He asked gently. Before I could answer, Ryan stepped into the room. She was throwing a tantrum, he said. She tripped and hit her head. Kids fall all the time. The doctor nodded politely but kept writing. He wasn't convinced. Neither was I. Not anymore. That night, after Lily finally fell asleep, I sat alone in the family waiting area. Hospitals after midnight have a strange kind of silence. The vending machines hum. Cleaning crews polish floors. Televisions play with the volume turned low. Everyone you pass is carrying some kind of worry. Mine had become unbearable. I started replaying the last 2 years in my mind. Little moments. Tiny things. Things I had dismissed because they didn't seem important. Now they lined up like pieces of a puzzle. Lily had stopped running to the front door whenever Ryan came home. She used to. She'd hear his truck and race across the house. Then one day, she didn't. I assumed she'd outgrown the habit. Maybe she was just busy coloring. Now I wondered if something had already changed. She also became unusually quiet. Not all at once. Just a little at a time. Teachers always described her as polite, but Mrs. Holloway, her kindergarten teacher at Barker's Mill Elementary, had once asked me a question during parent-teacher conferences. Has Lily been sleeping well? I smiled. As far as I know. Mrs. Holloway hesitated. She's been drawing a lot of storms lately. I laughed politely. She's probably watching too many Disney movies. Mrs. Holloway smiled back, but something in her eyes said she wasn't asking about artwork. I never followed up. Then there were the bruises. Children get bruises. Every parent knows that. Lily climbed trees, rode her scooter, played tag at recess. There was always a reasonable explanation. Ryan always had one ready. She ran into the coffee table. She slipped outside. She bumped into the kitchen counter. Each story sounded ordinary enough, until I realized every explanation had come from him, never from Lily. One Saturday afternoon, our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, stopped me while I was watering flowers. Emily, she said carefully, I hope you don't mind me asking. Of course not. I heard a lot of yelling yesterday. I felt my face grow warm. Oh, Ryan was trying to get Lily to clean her room. Mrs. Ramirez nodded slowly. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. It is, I answered too quickly. She gave me a kind smile. If you ever need anything. I thanked her and changed the subject. Looking back, she wasn't being nosy. She was giving me an opening. I closed it. The hardest memory came just before my last field exercise. I was packing my gear while Lily sat on my bed hugging her stuffed rabbit. When are you coming home? Next Friday. She lowered her eyes. I wish you didn't have to go. I know, baby. She looked toward the bedroom door to make sure Ryan wasn't nearby. Then she whispered something I barely heard. I'll be extra good. At the time, I kissed her forehead and smiled. I know you will. Now those 4 words echoed through my head. Not because they were sweet, because they sounded like a child trying to survive. As tears filled my eyes, I finally admitted something I had fought against for years. The warning signs hadn't appeared overnight. They had been there all along. I was the one who hadn't been ready to see them. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily lying on the hardwood floor. Every time I opened them, I heard Ryan's voice. She should have listened. Around 6 the next morning, a nurse quietly checked Lily's vital signs. My daughter was still asleep, one arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit a volunteer from pediatrics had given her the night before. The bruise on her forehead looked darker in the morning light. I stepped into the hallway to stretch my legs. That's where I saw him. Mike Sanders. He was leaning against the nurse's station with a styrofoam cup of coffee, talking to another EMT. When he noticed me, he excused himself and walked over. "You holding up?" he asked. "I've had better mornings." He gave a sympathetic nod. "I imagine you have." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been keeping me awake. "What did you mean last night?" Mike looked down the hallway before answering. "Would you mind walking with me?" We stopped near a window overlooking the parking lot. The morning sun was climbing over Clarksville, catching the tops of the trees beyond the hospital. Mike took a slow breath. "I've been doing this job almost 24 years. "I appreciate that," I said. "But you scared me." "I know." "So tell me." He hesitated. "I'm not a police officer, Emily. I can't accuse someone of a crime without evidence." "But I can tell you why I recognized him." My heart started pounding. About 8 years ago, he said, I responded to a domestic violence call on the other side of Montgomery County. I stayed silent. There was a woman, maybe early 30s, single mother. We found her with a broken wrist and a concussion. "What does that have to do with Ryan?" Mike looked me straight in the eye. "He was standing in that living room." A chill ran through me. "He told deputies she'd fallen down the stairs." "What happened?" "The deputies couldn't prove otherwise." I swallowed. "The woman wouldn't testify." "Why not?" Mike shrugged. "Fear, financial dependence. Maybe she thought he'd change." He stared out the window for a moment. "There was a little girl there too." My stomach tightened. "About Lily's age." I didn't say anything. "I remember that child because she wouldn't let go of her mother's shirt." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I've seen thousands of patients over the years. Faces blur together. But some scenes stay with you." I whispered, "You're saying Ryan was involved?" "I'm saying I never forgot his face." My knees suddenly felt weak. Mike noticed and guided me toward a nearby bench. "You okay?" "I don't know." He sat beside me. "I debated all night whether I should even tell you this."
"Why?"
"Because memory isn't evidence." He wasn't wrong. Recognition wasn't proof. People resembled other people all the time. Maybe Mike had made a mistake. Maybe. I wanted to believe that. Then another thought hit me. Did he have a wife before me? I don't know. Children? I don't know. You never learned his name? We did. Mike paused. But the last name wasn't Carter. I stared at him. He used a different last name. Mike nodded slowly. That's what bothered me after I saw him yesterday. He reached into his wallet and pulled out an old folded business card. On the back was a faded case number written in blue ink. I wrote it down years ago because something about that call never sat right with me. He handed me the card. I kept telling myself I'd throw it away. Instead, he'd carried it for nearly a decade. I turned the card over in my hands. The ink had faded, but the numbers were still readable. If I were you, Mike said quietly, I'd ask for the police report. I looked up. You think there's more? I think, he answered carefully, you deserve to know everything about the man you brought into your daughter's life. Back in Lily's room, Ryan was sitting beside her bed, smiling as if nothing had happened. When he saw me, he stood and kissed the top of Lily's head. Then he smiled at me. The same easy smile that had fooled our neighbors, our church, even me. For the first time in 12 years, it looked completely unfamiliar. Lily came home 2 days later. The doctor said she would recover physically, but she needed quiet, plenty of rest, and someone she felt safe with. That last part stayed with me. Someone she felt safe with. It wasn't Ryan. The moment we walked through the front door, Lily wrapped both arms around my waist. Can you stay home tomorrow? I already called my first sergeant, I told her. I'm taking leave. She nodded with relief. Ryan stood in the kitchen pretending to unload groceries, but I could feel him listening. You don't have to make such a big deal out of this, he said without turning around. The doctor already explained everything. I looked at him. So did the paramedics. He finally faced me. For the first time in years, I didn't see confidence in his eyes. I saw him measuring me, trying to decide how much I knew. That night after Lily had fallen asleep beside me, I sat at the dining room table with Mike's business card. The faded case number was still there. I picked up my laptop. My hands hovered over the keyboard for nearly a minute. Part of me wanted to close it. If I searched, I might find something that would destroy everything I believed about my marriage. If I didn't, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering. I typed the case number into a public records website. Nothing. Then I searched Ryan's full name. Nothing unusual. A LinkedIn page. Old charity photos. A picture from a church fundraiser. The man looked exactly like the husband I'd introduced to everyone. Clean-cut. Friendly. Trustworthy. I almost laughed at myself. Maybe Mike had mistaken him for someone else. Then I remembered something he had said. That wasn't the last name. I leaned back in my chair. Different last name. I opened another search. This time I searched Ryan's birth date instead. Several results appeared. Most were ordinary. One caught my attention. A property record from Nashville dated almost 9 years earlier. The owner's first name matched Ryan's. The birthday matched too. But the last name wasn't Carter. It was Holloway. I stared at the screen. Ryan had never once mentioned another last name. Never. The next morning, while Lily watched cartoons in the living room, I drove to the Montgomery County Courthouse. The woman behind the records counter was probably in her 60s. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and greeted everyone with the same warm smile. "Can I help you? I'm looking for an old court file." She searched the computer. "Some older cases are archived. I don't mind waiting." She disappeared into the back room. 10 minutes later, she returned carrying a thin folder. "You're lucky," she said. This one hadn't been sent to storage yet. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely thank her. Most of the file had been sealed, but not all of it. I wasn't looking at a criminal conviction. I was looking at a petition for a protective order. Petitiona, Sarah Holloway. Respondent, Ryan Holloway. Same birthday, same first name, same face. Only the last name had changed. The petition described repeated intimidation, controlling behavior, property damage, threats. The order had been requested, then withdrawn 6 weeks later. No explanation. I sat there staring at the papers until the clerk quietly asked if I was all right. Yes, but I wasn't. Before leaving, I stopped by the sheriff's office. I wasn't expecting much. An older deputy listened patiently as I explained why I was there. He couldn't discuss confidential records, but when I mentioned the name Ryan Holloway, his eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. "You knew him. I remember hearing the name years ago. Was he arrested?" "I can't answer that." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "If I were you..." He glanced toward the lobby before continuing. "I'd talk to Detective Frank Delaney. Is he still here?" "He retired 3 years ago." The deputy scribbled an address on the back of a business card. "He fishes more than he works these days." I smiled despite everything. "I guess retirement agrees with him." "It does." The deputy folded the card into my hand. "But if anyone remembers that case..." He looked me squarely in the eye. "It's Frank." As I walked back to my truck, I realized something that made my stomach sink. For 12 years, I'd believed I was learning more about my husband. In reality, I'd only been learning the version of him he wanted the world to see. I called Detective Frank Delaney the next morning. He answered on the 4th ring. "This is Frank." "My name is Emily Carter," I said. "A deputy at the sheriff's office gave me your number." There was a pause. "What can I do for you? I think my husband used to be Ryan Holloway." The silence that followed told me more than any words could have. Finally, Frank sighed. "Can you meet me somewhere?" An hour later, I pulled into Strawberry Alley Ale Works in downtown Clarksville. It was too early for lunch, so the place was quiet except for a couple sharing coffee by the window. Frank was easy to recognize. Late 60s, gray beard, weathered hands. The kind of man who looked more comfortable in a fishing boat than behind a desk. He stood when I approached. "You must be Emily." I nodded. He motioned toward the empty chair across from him. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "So am I." A waitress brought coffee. Neither of us touched it. Frank folded his hands together. "I've been retired a few years. There are things I legally can't discuss." "I understand. But I can tell you what was public." I leaned forward. "Please." He looked at me carefully. "Ryan Holloway was never convicted of assault." That wasn't the answer I expected. But he always managed to stay one step ahead. Frank rubbed the side of his coffee mug. Witnesses changed their stories. Evidence disappeared. Victims withdrew complaints. Every single time. I felt my throat tighten. So everyone thought he was innocent. Frank gave a sad smile. "No. We thought we couldn't prove he was guilty." Those were two very different things. I drove home with more questions than answers. Ryan's truck was already in the driveway. He usually didn't get home until after 5. The moment I stepped inside, I smelled something unexpected. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, fresh dinner rolls. Ryan was wearing an apron. He smiled. Thought I'd surprise you. I stared at him. You cooked? He laughed. Believe it or not. Lily looked up from the kitchen table. Daddy made cookies. She smiled. But it wasn't the carefree smile I remembered from years ago. It looked practiced. Ryan pulled out a chair. Sit down. You've had a rough couple of days. For a brief moment, I almost believed him. Maybe this was guilt. Maybe he realized how badly he'd scared us. Maybe people really could change. Then I noticed Lily quietly watching him instead of eating. Every time Ryan reached for something on the table, she flinched ever so slightly. It lasted less than a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did. After dinner, Ryan washed the dishes. Another surprise. He even kissed my forehead. I'm sorry this week got so out of hand. I searched his face. He looked sincere, calm, gentle. The same man everyone at church admired. I hated myself for wondering if I'd imagined everything. That evening, while Ryan mowed the backyard, I called an attorney recommended through Army legal assistance. Her name was Janice Porter. She specialized in family law. I didn't ask about divorce. Not yet. Instead, I asked one question. If someone thinks their child is in danger, Janice interrupted gently, then you start documenting everything. What kind of documentation? Dates, photos, medical records, conversations, witnesses, everything. She paused. And Emily, yes, don't confront him until you're prepared. The next morning I bought a small notebook at Walmart. Nothing fancy, just a black spiral notebook. On the first page I wrote, Monday, May 8th, Lily diagnosed with concussion. Ryan stated, she should have listened. Then I wrote the time, the hospital, the doctor's name, the paramedics, every detail I could remember. It felt strange, like I was writing about someone else's life. Over the next week I quietly gathered everything. Copies of Lily's medical records, photographs of her bruises, school attendance reports, Mrs. Holloway's notes from parent-teacher conferences, even receipts showing when I had been away at military training. Ryan noticed I was quieter. You okay? He asked one evening. Just tired. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. You work too hard. I smiled. So do you. It was the easiest lie I'd ever told. That Friday night, Lily climbed into bed beside me after Ryan had fallen asleep. The room was dark except for the soft glow of the digital clock. She whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear her. Mommy, I'm awake. She took a shaky breath. When you go back to work. I waited. Please don't leave me alone with Daddy. Every doubt I'd been clinging to disappeared in that single sentence. This wasn't about an old police report anymore. This was about my daughter asking me to protect her. And this time, I wasn't going to fail her. The morning after Lily whispered those words, I sat alone on the back porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The sun was just coming up over our backyard in Clarksville. Ryan was still asleep. Lily was curled up beside me under a blanket, watching a pair of robins hopping across the fence. She hadn't said another word about her father. She didn't have to. Children don't invent fear like that. They live it. I finally admitted something I'd been avoiding. Keeping notes wasn't enough anymore. If I wanted to protect Lily, I needed proof no one could explain away. On Monday, I called an old friend from Fort Campbell, Sergeant First Class Ben Morales. We'd worked together for nearly 8 years in logistics. Ben had become one of the installation's information technology specialists after changing career fields. He'd always been the calmest guy in the room. I trusted him. We met for lunch at a little diner outside Gate 4. After listening without interrupting, Ben set his fork down. So you think he's careful? I know he is. He never loses control in public. No. And he probably knows exactly where the blind spots are. I nodded. Ben thought for a moment. I'm not telling you to spy on your husband. I know. But if something happens inside your own home... He leaned closer. Kentucky law is a lot different than people think. He explained what I could legally record inside my own house, and suggested I speak with my attorney before doing anything. That afternoon, Janice Porter confirmed everything. As long as you're acting within the law, she said, protecting your child comes first. 2 days later, I bought 2 small indoor security cameras from Best Buy. Nothing fancy, just enough to monitor the living room and the hallway near the front door. I installed them while Ryan was at work. One sat inside a bookshelf behind family photos. The other blended into a corner shelf beside the staircase. Unless someone knew exactly where to look, they were almost impossible to notice. Every recording automatically uploaded to secure cloud storage, or so I thought. For several days, nothing happened. Ryan smiled. Cooked dinner twice, helped Lily with her alphabet workbook, even folded laundry. If someone had walked into our house, they would have thought we were the happiest family on the street. Sometimes I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Maybe fear had distorted everything. Maybe I was looking for monsters where none existed. Then Friday arrived. I was in the garage organizing military gear for my return to duty. Ryan was inside with Lily. At first I heard nothing unusual. Then, his voice changed. It became sharp, cold. "Lily." Silence. I said, "Come here." Another pause. Then my daughter's frightened little voice. "I'm sorry." A loud crash echoed through the house. I ran inside. Ryan was standing over a broken glass on the kitchen floor. Lily was crying. "What happened?" I demanded. Ryan looked annoyed. She dropped a glass. I knelt beside Lily. Her hands were trembling. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'll clean it up." Ryan walked away without another word. That night, after both of them were asleep, I opened the security camera app. The recording began a few minutes before I came inside. Lily had accidentally knocked over a drinking glass while reaching for the refrigerator. It shattered. She froze. Ryan walked into the kitchen, not yelling. Not at first. He stepped close enough that she backed herself against the counter. He pointed his finger inches from her face. "You embarrass me every single day." Lily started crying. He grabbed her arm. Hard. Hard enough that she cried out. Then he shoved a chair backward with such force it slammed into the wall. The crash was what I'd heard from the garage. I watched the entire clip without breathing. When it ended, I saved 3 copies. One on my laptop, one on an encrypted flash drive, one in cloud storage. For the first time, I had proof. The next morning I opened the app again. Every video from the previous night was gone. My stomach dropped. The cloud account had been wiped clean. Every recording, every backup, gone. Ryan walked into the kitchen carrying his coffee. He smiled. "Technology isn't really your thing, Em." He took a sip. "You should probably let me handle that stuff." I looked at him. Then I smiled back. He thought he'd erased everything. What he didn't know was that Ben had insisted I set up automatic encrypted backups on a secure Army-approved storage drive before I ever plugged those cameras in. The evidence Ryan believed he'd destroyed was already sitting safely in another place he didn't even know existed. For the first time since Lily collapsed, I realized my husband had finally made a mistake he couldn't undo. The first thing I did Monday morning was drive to Janice Porter's office. I didn't tell Ryan where I was going. I simply kissed Lily goodbye at school, waved to her teacher, and headed downtown. Janice was already waiting with a legal pad when I walked in. "You brought the video?" I slid the flash drive across her desk. She watched every second without saying a word. When it ended, she took off her glasses and sighed. "Emily." "I know." "No." She looked directly at me. "I don't think you do." I frowned. "This changes everything." She explained that the video alone wasn't enough to guarantee Ryan would be convicted of a crime, but it was powerful evidence in a custody case. Combined with Lily's hospital records, photographs, and witness testimony, it painted a very different picture from the one Ryan wanted everyone to believe. "We're not trying to destroy him," Janice said. "We're trying to protect your daughter." There was a difference, one I needed to remember. Over the next 2 weeks, my life became a balancing act. By day, I smiled through normal routines. I packed Lily's lunch, folded laundry, went to physical therapy on post for an old knee injury, picked up groceries at Publix. At home, I watched. I listened. I documented. Ryan had no idea. If anything, he seemed more relaxed than ever. He believed deleting those videos had scared me into giving up. Instead, it made me more careful. Ben helped me organize every file into separate folders. Medical records, school records, photographs, video evidence, written notes, phone logs. Every document was dated and backed up twice. "If this ever ends up in court," Ben said, "nobody can accuse you of making things up." He smiled. "I've seen Army supply records with less documentation than this." For the first time in days, I laughed. "So you're saying my paperwork is finally impressive?" "It's terrifying." We both laughed. The moment lasted maybe 15 seconds. It felt good to remember what normal sounded like. Mike Sanders also stayed in touch. Not often, just enough. One afternoon he called. "I found something." "What?" I tracked down the deputy who responded to that old domestic call. My pulse quickened. "He retired last year." "Does he remember Ryan?" "He remembers the little girl." I closed my eyes. "The child?" "He said she kept asking if her mom was going to die." The words settled over me like cold rain. Mike continued. "He also remembers thinking that guy would hurt someone again." I looked out my kitchen window. Ryan was teaching Lily how to throw a baseball. Anyone driving past would see a father spending time with his daughter. Only Lily's stiff shoulders told a different story. A few days later, Child Protective Services contacted me. Not because I had filed a complaint. Because the hospital had. The concussion automatically triggered a review. The caseworker, Denise Walker, visited our home on a Thursday afternoon. Ryan welcomed her with sweet tea and homemade brownies. He joked about army life, asked about her drive, complimented her Tennessee Volunteers keychain. Denise smiled politely. Then she asked to speak with Lily alone. Ryan immediately answered. She gets nervous around strangers. Denise looked at him calmly. I'll only need a few minutes. His smile faded just enough for me to notice. That tiny crack in his mask gave me hope. The following Sunday, Ryan announced an idea over breakfast. We haven't had everybody over in months. I looked up from my coffee. What do you mean? A barbecue. He grinned. My parents. Your brother. The neighbors. People from church. We could use a little normal around here. Inside my heart started racing. Outside I smiled. That sounds nice. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I knew you'd come around. He thought the worst was behind us. He thought his reputation was untouchable. What he didn't know was that I had already shared every piece of evidence with Janice, with CPS, and with Detective Frank Delaney, who had agreed to testify if necessary about Ryan's past pattern of manipulation. The barbecue Ryan believed would restore his perfect image was about to become the day it fell apart. That night, after Lily was asleep, I stood in the backyard looking at the patio where Ryan planned to entertain our friends. I wasn't excited. I wasn't proud. Part of me still wished none of this were true. I wished the man I'd married had actually existed. The kind one. The patient one. The father everyone admired. But wishing couldn't change reality. For 12 years, Ryan had controlled every story people heard about him. Next Saturday, for the first time, he wouldn't be the one telling it. Saturday arrived warm and clear, the kind of Kentucky afternoon that usually brought neighbors outside to mow their lawns or wash their trucks. Ryan was in a great mood. By 10 o'clock, he'd already fired up the grill and put country music on the backyard speakers. He wore his favorite blue polo shirt and greeted everyone with that familiar smile I'd once fallen in love with. If anybody needs another burger, he called, laughing, I'm your guy. People laughed with him. Mrs. Ramirez brought potato salad. Pastor Jim and his wife carried a peach cobbler. Ryan's younger brother showed up wearing a Tennessee Volunteers cap and immediately started teasing everyone about football. Looking around, you'd think you were watching the perfect American family. That was exactly what Ryan wanted. Lily stayed close to me. She smiled when people spoke to her, but she never wandered far. Every time Ryan reached toward her, she instinctively took half a step back. Most people didn't notice. I did. So did Denise Walker. The CPS caseworker had accepted our invitation under the pretense of being a family friend Janice knew from church. Ryan had no reason to question it. I checked my watch. 2:15 p.m. Janice had arrived 15 minutes earlier. She was chatting casually with Mrs. Ramirez while pretending to admire the flower beds. Ben stood near the grill laughing at one of Ryan's stories. Even Mike Sanders had come. Not in uniform. Just jeans and a gray polo shirt. Ryan shook his hand like they were old friends. Neither man let on that they'd met before. Frank Delaney parked across the street, waiting inside his pickup. Everything was in place. My heart was pounding so hard I thought someone might hear it. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted the truth. If the truth ruined Ryan's life, that would be because of his choices, not mine. Ryan raised a paper cup. I just want to thank everybody for coming. People quieted down. We've had a stressful couple of weeks. He slipped an arm around my shoulders. But families get through hard times together. Several guests nodded. Pastor Jim smiled. Ryan looked at me. You want to say something, Em? I looked around the backyard. At our friends, our neighbors, the people who had trusted Ryan for years. Then I slowly stepped away from him. I do. The conversation stopped. Even the children seemed quieter. I've spent 12 years protecting someone I thought I knew. Ryan laughed nervously. Emily. I'm not finished. His smile faded. I nodded toward Ben. Without saying a word, he carried a flat-screen television from the garage onto the patio table. Ryan frowned. What are you doing? Janice plugged in a small media player. The screen lit up. Ryan took one quick step forward. No. It was the first genuine fear I'd ever seen on his face. The video began. There was no sound at first. Just Lily standing in the kitchen. She accidentally knocked over a drinking glass. It shattered. Several guests smiled politely. Children break glasses. Then Ryan walked into frame. The backyard became completely silent. Everyone watched him point a finger inches from Lily's face. Watched him grab her arm. Watched her recoil. Watched the chair slam into the wall. Pastor Jim slowly lowered his paper plate. Mrs. Ramirez covered her mouth. Ryan lunged toward the television. Ben stepped in front of him. I wouldn't. Ryan shoved him. Ben barely moved. Years in the army had taught Ben how to stand his ground. Ryan looked around wildly. This isn't what it looks like. No one answered. Then Mike Sanders spoke. Quietly. I've seen this before. Every head turned toward him. I recognized him the day Lily came into the emergency room. Ryan's face turned pale. Mike continued. Years ago, I responded to another domestic violence call. Ryan interrupted. He's lying. Frank Delaney walked through the backyard gate. So am I. Ryan froze. Frank held up a folder. I investigated that case. Janice stepped beside me. So did the court. Ryan looked toward the driveway. 2 Clarksville police cruisers rolled to a stop. He took 1 step backward, then another. An officer called out calmly, "Ryan Carter." Ryan turned and ran. He didn't make it 20 feet. One of the officers caught him before he reached the sidewalk. As they placed him in handcuffs, the entire backyard remained silent. The only sound was Lily's small voice behind me. "Mom." I turned. She ran into my arms. This time, I didn't let go. Ryan's arrest made the evening news, not because he was famous, not because the charges were unusual, but because it happened in front of nearly 24 witnesses at what was supposed to be a neighborhood barbecue. By Monday morning, everyone in Clarksville seemed to have heard some version of the story. Some people called, some texted. A few simply left casseroles on my front porch with handwritten notes that said things like, "Thinking of you," or "If you need anything, we're here." I appreciated every gesture, but none of it erased the image of Lily hiding behind me whenever someone knocked on the door. Ryan's attorney requested bail. The prosecutor objected. Janice called me as soon as the hearing ended. The judge denied it. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So he'll stay in jail? For now. It wasn't a victory. It was simply one less thing to worry about. The weeks that followed were exhausting. There were interviews with detectives, meetings with the district attorney, conversations with Child Protective Services, more paperwork than I had filled out during some Army inspections. Every question forced me to relive something I'd rather forget. When had the controlling behavior begin? Did Ryan ever threaten me? Why hadn't I reported it sooner? Each answer came with its own weight. The hardest question wasn't asked by a lawyer. It came from me. Every night. How did I not see it? Lily started seeing a child psychologist named Dr. Melissa Green. Her office didn't look like a doctor's office. It looked like a playroom. Shelves filled with stuffed animals, puzzles, crayons, a tiny table with 2 little chairs. After the 3rd session, Dr. Green asked if we could talk privately. Lily is making progress. I smiled for the first time that day. That's good. It is. She hesitated. But she's carrying something very common among children who've lived in fearful homes. Guilt. My heart sank. Guilt. Dr. Green nodded. She thinks she caused the yelling. I looked away. She told me she was trying to be good. I remembered those exact words before my field exercise. I'll be extra good. The memory nearly broke me. A month later, Ryan accepted a plea agreement on several charges, including felony child abuse and domestic assault. His attorney had advised him to avoid trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The hospital records, the videos, my journal, witness testimony. Even Ryan's own attempts to erase the recordings became part of the case. Judge Eleanor Brooks sentenced him to several years in state prison. Before deputies led him away, he turned toward me. For a moment I expected another excuse, another lie. Instead, he simply stared. I stared back. There was nothing left to say. After the hearing, Mike Sanders caught up with me outside the courthouse. "I've been thinking about that first call," he admitted. "The one years ago." "I know. I always wondered if I could have done more." "You did." He looked surprised. "You remembered." "You remembered his face." I smiled faintly. "If you hadn't..." I didn't finish the sentence. "I didn't need to." He understood. That evening I sat on the back porch while Lily chased fireflies across the yard. Mrs. Ramirez waved from next door. For the first time in weeks, Lily laughed. A real laugh. Not a careful one. Not a frightened one. Just a little girl laughing because she'd almost caught a firefly. I felt someone sit beside me. It was Dr. Green who had stopped by after one of Lily's sessions to drop off a workbook. She handed it to me. Then she asked quietly, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." She smiled kindly. "People like Ryan don't choose weak families." I frowned. "They choose trusting people." The words stayed with me long after she drove away. For months I had blamed myself for not seeing the truth sooner. That night, for the very first time, I began to forgive myself. A year has a funny way of changing the things you notice. Some mornings I still woke up before sunrise out of habit, expecting to lace up my boots and head to the motor pool at Fort Campbell. Then I'd remember I had officially retired from the Army after 23 years of service. People often asked if I missed it. The answer was yes. I missed the people. I missed the purpose. I even missed the terrible coffee in the company office. But I didn't miss the feeling that I had to choose between serving my country and protecting my daughter. Now every morning belonged to us. Lily had just started first grade. She had grown nearly 3 inches in the past year and insisted she was almost as tall as Mom. She wasn't, but I let her believe it. We had moved into a small farmhouse just outside Clarksville. Nothing fancy. A white porch. A red barn that needed painting. 2 rocking chairs. Mrs. Ramirez joked that I'd traded camouflage for tomato plants. She wasn't wrong. My biggest weekend project had become keeping squirrels out of the garden instead of checking supply inventories. It was a life I never imagined wanting. Now I couldn't imagine wanting anything else. Lily changed too. The nightmares came less often. She smiled more. Her teacher sent home notes about how much she loved reading aloud in class. One afternoon I picked her up from school. The bell rang. Children poured out the front doors carrying oversized backpacks and construction paper art projects. Then I saw her. She spotted me before I spotted her. Mom. She ran across the sidewalk as fast as those little legs could carry her. She threw both arms around my waist. I held her close, breathing in the scent of crayons and shampoo. A year earlier, I'd come home expecting that hug and found something that nearly destroyed us both. Now, there it was. Not because life had become perfect, but because she finally felt safe enough to run toward someone instead of away. Every now and then, people still recognized me at the grocery store. Some remembered the news coverage. Others had heard about the trial through friends. They usually asked the same question. Do you ever regret exposing him? I always answered the same way. No. Then I'd add something they didn't expect. I regret not asking harder questions years earlier. Regret and guilt aren't the same thing. It took me a long time to understand that. I couldn't change the past, but I could make sure Lily grew up knowing that home should never be the place you're most afraid of. A few weeks ago, Mike Sanders stopped by the farmhouse with his wife. He had finally retired from EMS. We sat on the porch drinking sweet tea while Lily showed him the vegetable garden she'd helped plant. He smiled. You know, he said, I've answered thousands of emergency calls. I believe it. But this is the first time I've ever seen one end like this. I looked at Lily chasing butterflies across the yard. So have I. We laughed. Not because what happened was funny. Because healing sometimes sounds like laughter after a very long silence. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that courage doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it isn't found in a military uniform, a courtroom, or even a police report. Sometimes courage is simply believing a frightened child when something doesn't feel right, and having the strength to act before fear talks you out of it. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening to my story. If it meant something to you, I'd love to know where you're listening from, or whether you've ever witnessed quiet courage in your own life. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people who trust you most. The end.